scholar for the program. So let me ask one question that we ask before all of our programs. How many of you are in this building for the first time today? Okay, a few hands, great. Well, welcome. We are so happy to have you here with us today to help us celebrate the emancipation of over 3,000 enslaved people in Washington, D.C. If you'll bear with me for a minute, I'll go through a few housekeeping things. And as you can see, we have one seat on the stage. One of our guests is stuck in traffic, and as soon as he gets here, he'll jump into the conversation, but we'll go ahead and get started. So, we are excited to have all of you here to help us celebrate this occasion. In addition to celebrating the emancipation of over 3,000 enslaved people in Washington, D.C., Hill Center is also celebrating a historical moment. It's been 5 years since this facility as it is opened, and 150 years since the Old Naval Hospital opened in this building. So we're celebrating both of those occasions, and we have a fundraiser going on to preserve this space. So all of you should have received one of these cards in your packet. So any generous donation that is made to the 150th campaign will go towards maintaining the space for generations to come. I also want to take a moment to thank our sponsors. This program is sponsored by the American Historical Association, the Executive Office of the Mayor, Humanities Council of Washington, D.C., and the Association for the Study of African American Life and History. So also everyone should have a flyer called At a Glance in your program. So this will give you some insight of the programs that we already have. And then we have 2 other programs that are happening tomorrow. So we have a morning program uncovering the past, the story of behind the slave's bill of sale. And that's going to be a wonderful program. The Washington Post is collaborating with us on that program. And that program will also give our participants an opportunity to tell their own family stories and to archive those to possibly be used later on. So please come out to that celebration. And then we have a wonderful concert that's going to cap off this event that will be held at Eastern Market tomorrow as well. So take a look at that, and if you haven't registered for those 2 events, please consider doing so. And last but not least, we have our survey that's also in your packet. So if you could please fill those out at the end of the session and leave those to be collected by us, that would be great. So at this moment, can everyone take a minute to turn off their mobile phones or silence them in some way? That would be great. And without further ado, I will go ahead and introduce our guests for the evening. First, we have Dr. Chris Meyer Ash, a native of Washington, D.C. Ash teaches the history at Colby College and serves as the editor of the Washington History magazine. He taught with Teach for America in rural Mississippi and co-founded the Sunflower County Freedom Project. He's the author of The Senator and the Sharecropper, The Freedom Struggles of James O. Eastland and Fannie Lou Hamer. He recently completed the forthcoming book, Chocolate City, Race and Democracy in the Nation's Capital, with our other guest this afternoon, Dr. G. Derek Musgrove. Musgrove is an associate professor of history at the University of Maryland, Baltimore County. He's the author of Rumor, Repression, and Racial Politics, a book that came out in 2012. He is the co-author, again with Chris Myers Ash, of the forthcoming Chocolate City, Race and Democracy in the Nation's Capital. And he's also the author of a number of popular and scholarly articles on post-civil rights era Washington D.C. politics. He received his PhD in U.S. history from New York University in 2005. They will be in conversation with Dr. Frank Smith. Dr. Smith is a civil rights activist and founding member of a Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, also known as SNCC. After moving to Washington, D.C., he was elected to the Advisory Neighborhood Commission, ANC, served a term on the D.C. School Board of Education, and served 16 years as a D.C. City Councilman. Smith is founder and director of the African American Civil War Memorial and Museum. And hopefully soon, we will be joined by Dr. Alphonse Hill. Dr. Hill is the former deputy mayor for finance under the Marion Barry administration. He was a professor professor of accounting and acting chair of Howard University. At Howard University, he currently is president of A.G. Hill and Associates PC and the executive vice president of Corby Northbridge Securities, Inc. Will you please take a minute and welcome our guests?
All right, well, good afternoon, everyone. I have been tasked with giving a bit of background information for our discussion today. And as I was preparing my remarks, I kept finding myself stopping and starting, wanting to tell roughly two different stories about Marion Barry to set up the conversation. And what I decided after I became a little bit frustrated was that I actually needed to separate two exact different stories, not just one about our subject, but in fact two about our subject. And so what I'm going to do really quickly is give you a quick biography of Marion Barry, the person, the man, the living human being. And then after that, give a quick background on Marion Barry, the symbol, the creature of our memories, the person that we remember based on our political allegiances, our wants and our desires in the here and now. So Marion Barry was born into a sharecropping family in Itta Bena, Mississippi. He was raised in Memphis and graduated from Lemoyne College. He earned a master's degree from Fisk University and was on his way to getting a PhD in chemistry when he was swept into the civil rights movement. He became the first chairman of the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, the country's most dynamic civil rights organization. He arrived in Washington, D.C. in 1965 to invigorate the city's SNCC chapter. The following year, he founded the Free D.C. movement to advocate for home rule, and right after that launched Pride Incorporated to funnel war on poverty money to unemployed young African-American men. His success at community organizing catapulted him into electoral politics. Between 1971 and 2015, with only very few breaks in between, he served 3 years on the school board, 15 on the council, and 16 in the mayor's office. Through these posts, he distinguished himself as arguably the most gifted and influential political figure in the history of Washington, D.C. Perhaps the only other person that had more influence than him on the city was John McMillan, the unelected mayor of Washington, D.C. For several decades before Barry got to the city, and while he was here for a little bit as well. Throughout this entire period, Marion Barry was a bundle of contradictions. At once, he was a man of the people who befriended the city's developers and real estate moguls, a notorious womanizer who consistently broke the glass ceiling in appointments to the city administration, elevating women to positions they had never occupied in the city's history before, and a swaggering extrovert who was deeply insecure. That's Marion Barry, the man. What I also want to talk about, though, is Marion Barry, the image or the symbol. For many residents, indeed for a significant number of Americans outside the city, former Mayor Barry is not so much a real-life human being as a symbol or a talisman. To invoke his name is to set down a marker, to express a point of view, to conjure all manner of meaning and subtext. Not just about Barry the politician, but about the city, about race relations. In fact, if you want to get really expansive about it, about American democracy itself. Now, not everyone who invokes Mayor Barry, of course, does so for the same reasons. For many, Barry is a symbol of the bad old days, a time when a corrupt politician maintained his hold on the levers of power through racial demagoguery and mismanaged the city into bankruptcy. When residents struggled to make the case, to paraphrase go-go legend Chuck Brown, that D.C. does not stand for Dodge City. For many others, he was a symbol of D.C.'s glory days, when a generation of black activists freed the city from white supremacists in Congress and channeled city contracts and jobs to African Americans who had never seen these benefits before. When D.C. stood, again, to quote another famous music legend from the city, or who was associated with the city, funk legend George Clinton, when D.C. was the nation's preeminent chocolate city. Now, oddly enough, these two different ideas of Barry have sort of been channeled into all of the academic, or all of the biographies that have ever been written about him. If you exclude, of course, his autobiography, which I think is a different animal altogether. All of them reflect these strong and divergent feelings. In 1991, Jonathan Agronsky described in his Marion Barry in the Politics of Race, a, quote, picture of a bold, gifted, charismatic leader who had done much for his constituents, yet who had ultimately betrayed them and himself. In discussions about their 1994 Dream City, Harry Jaffe and Tom Sherwood have often admitted that both of them have very different ideas about Marion Barry. And in fact, if you catch them on the wrong night, they'll actually argue from the stage about those different visions of Marion Barry in front of you. And Janetta Rose Barris, who in her 1998, The Last of the Black Emperors, likened Marion Barry to Anansi the Spider, a mythical figure from Ashanti folklore. To describe Barry, she quoted two different proverbs from the Ashanti, and they were these: "Woe be unto him who would put his trust in Anansi." And at the same time, "The wisdom of the spider is greater than all the world put together." Now, I want to point out one thing about every single one of these biographies. All of them were written in the 1990s, which, for those of you who can remember, was a horrible decade for Washington, D.C. Agronsky's book was written in 1991, right after the city had experienced the shame and the difficulty of Marion Barry's drug trial, and he had just headed off to prison. Sherwood and Jaffe wrote their book in 1994, when the city was on the eve of bankruptcy and Congress was beginning to threaten to take over the city with a financial control board. And in 1998, the city had lost a significant amount of home rule with the 1997 Congressional Act that stripped the mayor of most of his powers of governing, placed them in the control board completely. And so all of these books are trying to explain how the city had come to this horrible low moment, right? I think today we have a different task. If you think about history as a matter of perspective, where you're trying to figure out what that looks like, that thing over there, the past. And depending on where you're standing, the past is going to look slightly different. You're going to have slightly different perspective on it. We are standing in a moment when the city has a $2.6 billion surplus. When it is booming like it hasn't, quite frankly, since the 1940s and 50s, early 50s. And at the same time, when the black majority is all but gone, it's now a plurality and moving very quickly downward. And when issues of homelessness, wealth inequality are at a remarkable crisis period, and the mayor seems sort of to be doing something about them, sort of. Keep in mind, too, that our current mayor is a remarkably bland public figure. I mean, you know, Marion Barry was easily the best retail politician in the city's history. And our current mayor is someone who may do well at a press conference, right? And so with all of those things, I think, before us, stepping back and being able to think about who exactly Marion Barry was and what he meant for the city in this new moment will probably bring us very different visions than the ones that were created in the 1990s. So to begin that process, I'm going to turn it over to Chris, who will be running things from here on out.
Sure. Thanks, Eric. Yes, so I'm going to actually be asking questions primarily of Dr. Smith and Dr. Hill when he arrives. Although I will preface by saying I may be the only one, maybe Dr. Smith, in this room who actually lived in Itabena, Mississippi. Probably longer than Marion Barry himself did. I lived there when I was teaching down in rural Mississippi, and I wound up in Itabena, which is this big, but it was bigger than the town I was actually teaching in. So I am a native Washingtonian, and Marion Barry was my mayor. You know, when I was becoming politically aware, when I was in junior high and high school, I was a senior when he, when the famous video came out from the Vista Hotel. I got my first job through him for the Summer Youth Employment Program, the SYEP. Had that shirt for a long time before I finally outgrew it. Finally ripped it up. And so this idea of reconsidering Marion Barry is really, it's both professionally very interesting because I'm a historian of race in DC, but it's also personally very interesting. You know, I lived through those times when DC had gone through some troubles, and Marion Barry himself went through some serious troubles, and So it's an interesting process for me because it's reliving my childhood to go back to the 80s and to think about this man who was so extraordinary and yet so flawed, like our city itself. And so I think it's a great conversation for us to have today, and certainly we have one of the most eminent people to be part of this conversation with Dr. Frank Smith here. So I'd like to start, Dr. Smith, with Marion. Before he was Mayor Barry, could you tell us a bit about who Marion was before he became Mayor Barry, before he became this politician that's known around the world? What kind of man was he, and how do you account for his political rise?
Well, some of what you saw here in D.C. With Marion is some of what he always was. I met Marion when I was a student at Morehouse College in Atlanta. I was involved in the Atlanta Civil Rights Movement while there, and Marion was involved in the Nashville movement. He was in graduate school, so I think he was at Knoxville College at the time. He was a few years older than we were, because he was in graduate school. But he was also very active in the movement there in Nashville, and we used to joke back and forth about which one of our towns had the largest and most organized civil rights movement. Of course, we did better in Atlanta all the time, but that's where we met, and we eventually formed the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, and he was elected our first chairman. In those days, the way you got elected chairman was you doze off in the meeting, and while you're asleep, somebody nominates you for chairman. You wake up, you're the chairman of the organization. Because nobody really wanted to be chairman. Because chairman didn't do anything, didn't have any power. He was a spokesperson for the Student Nonviolent Coordinating, and Marion was elected the first chairman. Because I think he wanted to be chairman too. He was 6 feet tall, he was a swashbuckling, tall, smart guy, he was always articulate. And so that's how I got elected chairman. So he, but ironically, for a guy who eventually dropped out of Morehouse College and went to Mississippi to become one of SNCC's full-time organizers, went to many times, spent more time in Illinois than Marion did, although he said he was born in Illinois. He never was active very much in the actual civil rights movement. I don't know if he was ever arrested in any of those demonstrations. I'm sure he wasn't. I'm not even sure he was at the March on Washington. I'll tell you a funny story about that in a few minutes. But he was not in the 7 Montgomery March. He was not in those big. And yet he was a legendary figure because he was always around. I'll give you an example of what I mean by that. A few years ago, we were working with a company that was going to do a movie about Macomb, Mississippi, Macomb was famous because it had probably more bombings in 1961, I believe, it wasn't any other city in Mississippi. There were 75 churches and homes and schools going in that little town. And I went through there with Julian Bond on my way from New Orleans back to Morehouse. I had not left school there, and I was still a student there. I went through there and spent the night there in a home with a lady whose house had been bombed, with Julian and 9 others. And then the next day we were in a meeting with SNCC talking about a plan for a student march. And we look at talk about whether we're going to lead these high school kids on a protest march from school. And while we were up here talking, we hear people coming down the street. The students have marched out, closed the school down. All the teachers, all the janitors, everybody marching from the school downtown. So we're trying to reenact this scene. There were 3 of us in the room, one of whom was Marion Barry. We couldn't even remember who the 4th person was. Between all of us, we did not remember who, but we knew Barry was there because he was part of these discussions. So he was always around, and he was at that time he was still the chairman of SNCC. So he was there then because he was chairman of the Student Nonviolent Coordinating. But he was always around, and so when he ran for office here in D.C., I would say arguably ran for office as probably one of the most qualified people in the country to ever run for office. And here's what I mean by that. By the time we reached adulthood, or say another 25, all of us, by the time we reached 25 years of age, we had been marching and picketing and going to jail, leading demonstrations. And one of the responsibilities was that if you got somebody put out of, like Ms. Hamer, you got somebody put off this plantation, she's a subject of one of your books, that's why I mentioned her. You got Ms. Hamer evicted from this plantation, now you had to take the responsibility for Ms. Hamer and her family. They didn't have any place to stay, they didn't have any food, they didn't have any security, they didn't have and if you didn't do something to make sure Ms. Hamer was okay, because she had a big voice, A lot of friends. You couldn't get anybody else to go on any demonstrations with you because of retribution. So, and we had to maneuver through all of that in a hostile Mississippi environment, hostile Virginia, hostile. And so when Barry came to Washington, D.C., when we moved there, discovered that people in D.C. didn't have the right to vote. And that they were just as bad off almost as people in Mississippi, except they didn't get their house burned down at night. It was pretty easy for him to figure out how to get organized here. So he started fighting over it. By the time he wants to be mayor, he's already got a group of young, dispossessed, disinherited black people who are outside the system. Now they depend on him. And the public depends upon him to provide for them. And he does. And I think he does that. And I think it's hard. If you don't get that dynamic, I don't think you can ever fully appreciate the impact of Barry. And let me also add one other thing that you didn't even want to mention in your summary of him. Washington, D.C., Marion Barry, the administration that I had a part of, expanded the black middle class in America. We built the largest black middle class in the country. At the end of the day, we built the largest black middle class in the country here. Now taking over government, bringing those people into government in professional jobs that they were denied before, on blue, before African Americans took that office. And it wasn't just a question of taking over being a caretaker. Barry would walk into a room full of white people and say, how come there ain't no black people in here? Why aren't there any black auditors in here? Why aren't there any black accountants? Why aren't there any black lawyers? That was a bold statement. Can you imagine a mayor saying that now? Can you imagine the current mayor walking in the room saying? It was a bold statement. That somebody, but if he didn't do that, he would have been just a caretaker. He would have been a caretaker, and probably wouldn't have been reelected. Because one of the reasons why Barry could get reelected so many times, and I close with this, because he had something that none of us ever managed. I worked hard at this. I managed to get reelected 4 times, 5 times, really. But he had people in the streets who would say, Marion Barry gave me my first job. He helped me buy a house. He helped me get my kids to college. People were just messing with him because he tried to help us. So, and that's something that really, politicians crave that. See, if you can ever get that in your portfolio, you get reelected as many times as you want. So he managed to do that, and I said it that way because I wrote the Homestead Housing Preservation Program. I took that over, ran it from my office almost, put my staff over to run it. Barry gets credit for having done all homestead programs. Everybody who has a housing homestead program, Marion Barry gave it to him. The night he went to the Vista Hotel, he and I and others were at the D.C. library pulling names of the lottery program for people who would get houses. At that time, nobody was buying houses. So we took all those 1,000 houses that the city had taken tax, the people pay the taxes. We gave them away to people. Not only did we give you the house for $250, we gave you the first $10,000 to fix it up. Because so Barry and I had full names at the lottery program in the library. I left and went home. He left and went to the Vista Hotel. But what was he doing before he left? He was providing really hope. Those meetings where those names were full, they were like, it was like a revival meeting. Everybody in there wanted to get a house, and it was their only chance. And we want to go, there were only about 10 or 12 or 15 of them were going to get houses. So they managed to get those because that's all we could do at one time. And then everybody else got ready to come back next time. That's where he was. And so he managed to develop that, I think, for himself here in the District of Columbia. And I'd like to say Marion Barry set the high bar for all mayors. All mayors, black and white. He set the high bar, and in some respects he set the low bar too, because of personal behavior. But if you don't get the high bar part of it, you don't really get the appreciation for what you get for the city. The year President Obama ran, there were 405 black mayors in the United States. I'll bet you that every one of them owed some of their courage and their creativity to the model Marion Barry set.
So let's bring Dr. Hill into the conversation here. I'd like to go back a little bit to the beginning of his first term, Marion Barry's first term. Maybe you could tell us a bit from your insider's perspective of what Marion Barry and his administration found. So he wins this stunning upset victory in 1978, becomes mayor. What does the district financial situation look like at that point? What kind of government does he inherit, and what does he try to do to change it?
Well, let me just say, well, this is open feedback. Let me just say that I first met Mayor Berry in Chicago. I think he was invited to speak at Push, which was Jesse Jackson's foray after he was dethroned by Appalachian folks. He said before Bush, and Berry was there with a contingent of people from Mississippi, and I was the collection guy for Jesse. I was taking whatever we could get on that weekend. And I think I met him when he came to Chicago when Dr. King had the march into Cicero, Illinois. I think I met him there also. And Dr. King said he's never seen so much viciousness in the eyes of people that did in Caucasian people in Cicero, Illinois. And King had been all over the South. But to get to the point, there wasn't much in the way of management in the district. I think preceding Berry, there must have been a sort of a voluntary retirement house cleaning in the district. There was not much history there. We did have people still there, but they were the younger people. All of the older folks kind of had retired. Most of the Caucasian people had retired, and so there wasn't much there. There was one CPA in the district, working for the district when I came to the district, and he was working in general services. An agency that didn't have much impact. It was places to keep the place clean and maybe construct something or build something or repair something. So we were sort of absent of a lot of financial managers who know the history of the district, where the finances were, how much we needed, whatever. Secondly, the most important thing in the district at that time was the federal payment. The budget, everything was made kind of like contingent on that federal budget. There was not much in the way of accounting system that measured the budget to the actual expenditures throughout the year. We were just not that competent at that time. So everything was basically built on how much cash we were going to get. I think we lived and died with the real estate tax collection. That's when an abundance of money would come in twice a year. But at that time, there was no way that we managed that money in the sense that we had more payables on the books when that money came in. So what that money was used for to pay back payables. And we would go until we run out of cash again. We always basically had like a cash crisis. So it was not enough financial, professional management. The Congress had commissioned Arthur Anderson, which was then the largest accounting firm in the nation, who they subsequently put out of business, which was a sin, to review the district finances. They did a 1,200-page report to the Congress and said the district was unauditable. You don't believe me? Go and look at the history. That's exactly what they said. Unauditable. We didn't know where everything was. We didn't count well enough for our assets. We didn't know where most of the money was. Every agency was its own fiefdom. They control not the cash, but they control their own expenditures. And we did not have computerization at that time. Everything was what we called a batch processing. If you were in human service agency, you wanted to pay somebody, you would batch up some bills, send it over to the controller's office for payment. So that information was coming by hand, on paper, to a small office for payment. We didn't know how to prioritize those payments. What should be paid first? Only thing we knew was this bill was the oldest. It might be a $10 bill, but we got $2 million bills sitting over there we know we have to pay. Otherwise, those services would be cut off. So it was priority of payment on a cash basis, on a paper basis, that we actually walked into in the district when Mayor Berry took over. And we were confronted with this report that says that the district is unauditable. At the same time, the federal government is talking about auditing. There are no other states, no other federal agency, or any public agency required to be audited. Check the record. We were now confronted with the Congress presenting a budget for financing every year. So what do we have? We didn't have much of a system. We had some dedicated people who were working, and they worked in certain agencies where there was always problems. The district had retired people, and they were living everywhere from Romania to Pakistan to where around the world. And they expected their check basically once a month. And when they didn't get it, they called from Europe, from wherever, wanting to know what happened. Now, you guys get paid today, you're on direct deposit. That was unheard of. Nobody got direct deposit. We wrote checks. We signed checks. Consider the school system with 110 locations. Every 2 weeks, these people have to be paid. We're cutting checks. We now have to sort these checks by agency, by person. We didn't have to deliver these checks to all of these agencies where people are expecting their payroll. So it was really an antiquated system built on the prior years, and not much really intelligence in the system that could give us new people any assistance. So it was really you have to learn how to do based on good financial management. I recall when we decided that, look, we're going to go on direct deposit. This is kind of a new thing. So on the check stub, we would write, pick a bank, give us the bank, and we're going to start sending your checks to the bank. Now here we have a system. If you work for the district government, you want to buy a refrigerator at Sears, all you did is come to the payroll office, get a form, fill it out, take it to Sears, how much is the refrigerator, when it's going to be delivered, and then take so much a month out of my paycheck. Now the district is charged with now paying your bills. Everybody, that was the easiest thing to do. Get the paper, take it to Sears or wherever, and buy whatever you need, and the district's going to send you a check every 2 weeks for my payment. Now we are managing personal people business. Okay? So this was the nonsense what Barry found when he came. Now how do you fix that was a problem. When I put on the note, right on the bottom of the pay stub for everybody to see, we're going to direct deposit. You got 5 banks. If you don't have a bank, we pick 5. Pick one of those. Because we're going to send you a check there. What agency you think fought the hardest not to do that? I bet you couldn't guess. Up to this DC, maybe 30 agencies. Which one fought the hardest against that? The police department. People wanted their check in their hands so they could go to these trucks that outside would cash a check. You remember those trucks? Anybody remember? I don't know what they call it. But anyway, you can go to the truck and cash a check. So that was the most inefficient you could even think of way of paying somebody. But they wanted their check. We had a warehouse probably at least a size and a half bigger than this building. And what do you think that warehouse was full of? It was full of canceled checks. We got to reconcile all these bank statements because each agency was like a fiefdom. They had emergency kind of funds they had to pay, especially Department of Human Service that handled a lot of welfare patients or parents or whatever. They always had an emergency there. In the middle of the night, somebody's put out. Somebody needs this, somebody needs that.
Could I just interrupt Al a little bit on this too? Because Al and I, we do this a lot. We know each other very well. Let me just interject one other thing, which I think you should go into the mix too. And that is that council members who, especially ones like myself who stay in office for a long period of time, chair of the housing committee, in my 10 years chairman of the housing committee, I may have seen 2 mayors and 5 directors of the Department of Housing. So by the time I get 3 or 4 years into this, I know more about the housing department than the housing department director does. And besides, I handle our budget when it comes to the council. And we approve the directors when they get appointed. And so we get caught up in this too. We're trying to figure out how to manage these agencies. And for example, the DC, during my tenure, DC actually, of course, we spun off these public housing authorities from the district government. Public housing authority should have been an independent authority from the beginning. These public housing authorities are funded by the federal government. And, but it was part of our Department of Housing, and as Al said, because of the lax management and whatever it is, the district government was making payroll for the housing authority people, employees, because the housing authority itself wasn't billing the federal regularly enough or orderly enough to get the money, so they had it in time to make the payroll. And so the city was filling the pot, filling in the gap, because it had to, because these were district government employees. And if the district government employee works, they have to be paid. If you don't want to pay them, you have to fire them, get them on the payroll. If they're on the payroll, you have to pay them. So the council gets caught up in this too, in trying to help figure out how to manage this. It was a mess when it first started, but you know, it took within a few years, DC had an exemplary auditing department. It just didn't have enough money. It didn't have enough money, and it doesn't get enough money until the control board takes over the city and does many things, spins off many of those state functions that should not have been part of the district function in the first place. Among those things that it's spun off was that huge payment, unfunded pension payment that had been set up by the federal government when they ran the city. They set up this elaborate pension program that was not funded. And the city government was funding it out of cash because they didn't have the other way to fund it.
So finances sound like they were a serious problem. And hearing you talk about it now, it sounds like ancient history to think about people physically having to fill out all these forms and then send it over, and then everybody's doing this all by hand. So it really wasn't that long ago. All this was taking place.
79, so it really wasn't.
Right. So finances were one of the challenges. What were some of the other challenges, and this goes to either of you, that Mayor Berry faced during the course of his first 3 terms?
Well, we always had a cash crisis because, you know, cash comes in at certain times of the fiscal year. For instance, real estate taxes, which was probably the largest amount of cash that would come in, maybe every 6 months. We got a bunch of cash. So cash management was a serious problem. So we did not have the authority to borrow money from anywhere. We borrowed money from the federal government. I mean, I'd send a GS5 over to come back with a $500 million check. Okay. We put it on the book, we owe the federal government. We didn't care about that because we know we would never pay it. We had no capacity to pay the federal government. So that just went up and up and up. One of the biggest expenditures Dr. Smith was telling you about was the pension. Police, the fire, the teachers, the judges, I think it was one other. We were writing checks like $200 million maybe every quarter to fund that retirement program. The federal government gave us that pension program when they gave us so-called independence or electoral process of mail. I guess it goes way back. But they gave us the pension program. It was completely unfunded. So where are we going to get the money from? We got the money from the feds, but the Fed was reluctant. And I found out one of the most difficult unions was the fire and police. They knew everybody on Capitol Hill. They could go up there and get something out of Capitol Hill before the mayor could. Because they were good old boys from Southern Maryland, Virginia. All these guys that retired. Well, they retire when they do 20 years. They're probably 42 years old. So they got plenty of time to go up and get pounds and pounds with their congressmen. They could, anything we wanted to do, they didn't like, they tried to stop. So now we got this block of politics we have to deal with to show and prove that we need the money. If we don't get the money, we're going to have problems, serious cash flow problems. So that was a challenge all the time. Almost back in the days of Mendel Rivers, when he basically was Southern guy from South Carolina that basically fixed everybody's parking tickets, did anything else, and didn't argue with the mayor about this or that. That preceded Barry. So the whole history goes way back. But we didn't have control, but you had all the responsibility to deliver.
Could I say one other thing about this? I think it would be hard to exaggerate the impact of what happened here in 1968, since we just celebrated 4 days ago, 49th anniversary of the death of Martin Luther King. We call it death, but y'all know he died when you say your prayers at night, gather your family around, say good night, and wake up the next day in heaven. He didn't die, he got shot, he got killed, he was assassinated by the terrorists in Memphis, Tennessee, and as a result, African Americans all over the country just went into uproar. It happened here too. I moved here in January of 1968. The riot took place in April. It was so bad. I thought about moving back to Mississippi. So the very government and myself and others had to figure out how to rebuild this city because everybody with 2 nickels and rubbed together moved out of here after the riots. Literally, the only people who didn't go were the people who couldn't go. You know, in my ward, in Ward 1, the only people who couldn't go were the ones. The only people who didn't were the ones who couldn't. There were for sale signs everywhere. Well, I don't know how long. And when I said we could, the city was giving away housing home care program, we were giving them away because nobody wanted them. People would abandon them because they didn't want to pay the taxes. They didn't see any upside in it, so they just walked away, which is what people do. And so, among all that, you've got to figure out how to make the government, how to build a government, a base, a tax base here. So, and then you've got people now who really do have a lot of really legitimate need. And so this happens not just in D.C., it happens all across the country. And so these black mayors now that are coming into office, coming in somewhat because of this, by the way. I said earlier, 4 and 5 black mayors in the country, many of them come in office because white people abandon these cities. So now all of a sudden there's a black majority because white people have left Detroit. They just left Chicago, they left Atlanta, they left these cities, New Orleans. And so the African Americans are the majority because many of them couldn't afford to leave, at least not fast enough. Now the black middle class is moving, but not the and I say this often about PG County. I say the black middle class is moving out of town. They're leaving their poor relatives behind. Now some of their poor relatives have moved out there now. So PG County's demographic looks similar to DC's demographic now. But I think that if you don't mix that dynamic into this, so you got a guy coming into office who really cares about his city, who cares about his country, by his demonstrated already by his commitment to the SNCC and the civil rights movement. We see government as a way to better the lives of people, of poor people. We see government, and we talk about this, by the way, in the civil rights movement. It's not just something that we start talking about as politicians. We're talking about this in the civil rights movement because remember, we're trying to build a better nation. We're trying to build a better world. And we're in places where we know eventually if people will get registered to vote, we're going to take over. We're going to be the majority in the Mississippi Delta. We hadn't even thought about Washington, D.C. at that time until we moved up here. I said damn jokingly to somebody on another panel not long ago. They said, why do so many people from SNCC end up in Washington, D.C.? I said, well, it was the closer we can get to the Mississippi Delta without getting shot at. Well, the majority black. Black people being discriminated against. They couldn't vote. So what's the difference between that and Mississippi? It was safer and it was closer to the federal government. So if you want to find a place where you can work your magic and try to make something happen, so a lot of us ended up here. I swear that's certainly why I ended up here. I'm sure that's why Barry ended up here in D.C.
So one of the things also is that this exodus of people who left Washington in times of the riot and thereafter, the effect on the cash flow of the district was tremendous. The people who left paid taxes, or they had good jobs, so they paid taxes, and that was a heavy impact when that exodus went away. That was a heavy impact on the budget. We have less revenues coming in, but we have more challenges. People can't afford to pay the rent. They're sick. You got to keep the hospital open, the school system, and the school system and the hospital were like independent agencies. They were like the mayor of their fiefdom. And sometimes they act like it until they got called to task. But all those things that happened in terms of the exodus had a serious impact on the cash that was collected by the district. At the same time, different kinds of services are required because we got more poor people here now. We've got people who can't afford to pay this or pay that or go to the doctor. And we have to keep these places open, especially the hospitals. And they can't turn away anybody. And the school system, their doors are all open. I know you could come to America last week and you have a place in the public school. That's just the law. So the impact was still there, but the cash was going away. And we were crying to the feds that, look, you own all this land, all these buildings, you give us stuff back, you got to give us more. Bring your budget here. Show us your budget. And they would take an inordinate amount of time to review, call all of us on the Hill to testify. And, they want to cut everything. They were always in the cut mode. I don't know, maybe all the council heavily Republican at that time. I don't recall. But it was always, we got to get less. And at the same time, we had two people in the district when I arrived that prepared the forecast for our revenues. Because we got to make a budget. Now, where do you start when you're making a budget? Well, what do I have coming in? What can I expect in terms of dollars coming in, revenue? So we had two people. One should have been retired 20 years ago, and one guy was just kind of like been there 10 years. And I can remember the first time Mayor Barrett met with these two gentlemen. I was called to bring them up. We all went up to the mayor's office. Said, Mayor, I wanted to know, how do you guys forecast the revenue that we put in the budget? Now, remember now, different agencies. The budget office really never talked to those two guys. Those two guys was under finance and revenue. The budget office was up there close to the mayor because in a municipality, the budget is blood in the system. People operate based on the budget.
Roadmap.
What's behind the roadmap? Where are the signs tell you how to meander through this thing? There are none. People, I got a budget. Look, we're trying to cut the budget. You need to give up some positions this time. We had a deficit last year. Well, raise taxes. You can't cure a deficit by raising taxes. That just creates a worse problem for your constituency. They got, you got different political problems then altogether when you talk about raising taxes. So, this was the kind of atmosphere we were operating in. A little hostile.
Right.
Everybody.
So you've talked a lot about finances and also this idea of how limited home rule really was. We all celebrated when home rule comes in 73, 74, for the first time in a century, DC residents are able to vote, and it's very exciting, but it came with constraints, it came with limitations, and it sounds like this was something that you bumped up against constantly with these legislators on Capitol Hill who
And
department authority.
And department heads.
Right, and department heads. So, let's talk about some of the other challenges, including you mentioned safety. By the 1980s, DC had been hit by mid to late 80s. Of course, we were hit with the crack epidemic. We had this surge in crime and murders in our streets, and so maybe you could tell us a little bit about how the Barry administration dealt with this. A lot of other mayors in other cities are dealing with this as well in the mid to late 80s.
Well, we suffered with it, and the reaction, I would say 9 times out of 10, came less from the populace, because they understood bad neighborhoods and problems in the neighborhood, and they knew some of the people who were the bad eggs in the neighborhood. The problem came from the Congress. You had a crime happen on that federal fief anywhere. Automatically, we get the command, well, you got to hire another 50 policemen. Don't pay for them. I'm going to pay for the one we got. Every time something major like that incident, the Hill was crying, call Barry, you got to have more. The last call I got, we were ordered to hire another 300 policemen. We already had, I think, almost 3,000, 2,800. Now you put on some major happened, some crime or something happened. Now, but when it came to policemen, they would put the extra money there. They would come up, find the extra money to go there. But they didn't find the money to go for the policeman's pension. That was still coming out of the district budget. Every maybe quarter, we were having to write checks for maybe like $200 million. Judges, policemen, firemen, teachers, and somebody else was thrown in. That pension program, when we so-called got this independence, they gave it to us with nothing in it. And these people were still out there expecting a pension check. So it was, any incident was a problem. Not just budget-wise, but, human history.
Let me say something about the crime problem too, because I hadn't thought about it like this until about 6 months ago. Somebody was writing a book about the district actually. Because I was in office, I got elected in 1982. I think it was 1985, from 85 to about 95, when we had that great surge in the cocaine epidemic, and then we became known as the murder capital of the world. My daughter, who went off to the University of Pennsylvania, I think in '89, told me that when she was a student at the University of Pennsylvania, that she started telling people she was from Maryland because they thought anybody from Washington, who they saw from Washington, D.C. had a pistol and some cocaine in their pocket. So she said, I just got tired of that, Dad. So I started telling people I was from Maryland. So we all suffered with this thing, including innocent people like my daughter who had nothing to do with any of this, and who was victimized by the image of the city. It's hard to, as I think back on it now, I represent Allen Morgan, Mount Pleasant, and U Street, those areas. We have a lot of public housing in our ward and things like that. And so, but I have to say this, I never felt personally endangered by any of this. And the way a ward representative works, you got to be all over the ward. If the street doesn't get clean, you got to clean it. If there's a shooting in the neighborhood, you got to go out there and form armed hat patrol. Y'all got to walk through the neighborhood. You got to walk through the crime scene too. And that was, you all remember those orange hats. We don't have any of them anymore, but we had them all over the city. Like it was a citizen patrol. It was unarmed citizen patrol. Because we couldn't get enough police officers to patrol the streets. I remember introducing a bill one time called 2 in Blue in View. It was a law that required the city to station police officers to walk beats in neighborhoods where there was more than a certain number of crimes committed. And I had a young lady working with me named Savannah Little, and she said, we ought to name all these bills so people remember them. So she named this one 2 in View, 2 in Blue in View. And the thing about it was always interesting was that, we always had this contradiction. And Barry used to say, those of us who grew up in the civil rights movement didn't really trust the police department. We never had a police department we could trust. And by the way, the first office that Barry got elected to in Washington, D.C. was not the Board of Education. He was elected to the 3rd District Police Advisory Committee. And I saw why do they have a 3rd District Police Advisory Committee? Because the issue of police brutality. The police department just said it was from mostly down south white people. They came up with their attitudes. They treated black people awful in the city. Now, and so they formed this police advisory committee. Barry got elected chairman almost the same way. Nobody else really wanted to be chairman, and he got elected chairman of that committee. Put together, it was a committee to hear complaints about police brutality with the 3rd District Police Station.
Also, there was always a complaint that most of the policemen didn't live in D.C. So
I introduced another bill, which is still in effect, by the way, that gives police officers can buy out, police, fire, and teachers can buy in the district for almost nothing, and they got a preferential lending program. When I introduced that bill, the mayor of New Orleans called me up. The mayor of New Orleans called me up and said that he said, in New Orleans, people want to live 3 zip codes away from New Orleans. The cops want to live 3 zip codes away from New Orleans. Because they were scared to live in the neighborhood that they were patrolling, which goes completely against the notion of local police control, police action. He had orange hat people willing to walk around out there. Police didn't want to walk around. So it was an awful situation. I think a lot of it was related to crime, to poverty, to the fact that we were unable at the time to get enough jobs for those same young black men that Mary had used to start his political career off. And we weren't able to get enough money in here to make the schools better, which is kind of ironic now that we have, and I said to Al the last time I saw him, I spent 16 years in the city council here in D.C. There was not a surplus a single year that I was in office. We had to take nothing to make something out of it. We had to create a homestead program. I remember when we bought the first street sweeper. We take those street sweepers for granted right now. First street sweeper we bought for the city, I took money from the housing department. We had to get this money from economic development. I took some economic development money from the housing authority, $150,000 to buy a street sweeper. And the mayor told me if I bought one, I had to buy 2. So I put one in Ward 1. Guess where the other one went?
It is Ward.
Capitol Hill. Capitol Hill. Guess where the other one went? Capitol Hill. So we had to do something about these Congress people. Try to make the world better. But we couldn't clean the streets because we didn't have, we needed money to do that with. So we had to be creative. I think that, to put this in Barry in a little bit more perspective, and I think people will do this as time goes on, they will look at it more and more perspective. As a civil rights worker, I will tell you this. We have more black people from SNCC move to Washington, D.C. than any other city in the country. I was looking at that situation the other day from Fauntleroy, where he got, over there in the officer's house and all that stuff. I said that never would have happened to somebody from SNCC. We still have an organization now for friends and stuff. And why did most of the ministry move to DC? We got jobs for them. They work here. Many of them got retired from the city government here in the District of Columbia. Because we wanted people around us that we could trust, people who weren't scared to go out and take chances and walk the streets and talk to the people, and who would help organize and make this place a better place. And I think that if you look at what happened, the great dynamic of what happened in the United States, when in 1950 there were only about, I wrote this down before I came here. In 1950 there were 75,000 blacks enrolled in college in the United States. By the year before President Obama runs for office, there's 2.5 million black people going to college. Now, most of those 2.5 million blacks are going to what were historically white colleges before. I just want to give you some idea what this civil rights movement did to change America. In 1950, black people earned $8 billion with a B. All the money we made picking cotton and China shoes. By the time President Obama runs, we earned $900 billion. In 2008, that figure is greater than GNP of Canada. Now, the last figure is where did all this money come from? It comes from colleges and schools. The other place where it comes from, there's 700,000 black people registered to vote in 1950. By the time we get to 2008, there's 19 million black people registered to vote. So Obama takes a look at that and says, I think I can get elected president.
So thinking
Now,
about
wait a minute. He got 19 million. He needs 60 million to get elected, right? Y'all know that, right? And if all 19 million of us lived in Chicago and vote twice the way they did on it, we still would have lost, right now?
That's right.
We still would have lost. So how does he get elected? He has to reach across the aisle and find enough whites and Hispanics and others, women who are willing to vote for him, as Dr. King said, because of the content of his character rather than the color of his skin. But of those, at the time I told you before, there were 405 black mayors here at the time the President Obama got elected the first time. Most of those jobs were in local offices. Most of the jobs that produced that wealth, that $900 billion worth of wealth, are in jobs that black people were locked out of before 1950 because of the color of their skin. Racial segregation was not just about the fact that you had to ride in the back of the bus and drink colored water and as I did, walk to school while white kids rode to school. It was not just that. It was the fact that African Americans right here in the District of Columbia were locked out of certain jobs. You couldn't even apply for those jobs. And so Barry gets elected mayor, well, I get elected city council. In the big cities, most of those jobs are unionized. So he couldn't just go up in there and say, I'm going to fire all the white people and hire black people up here. Because the unions were our friends. That's how they helped us get elected. So we weren't going to, so how do you get people elected? I mean, how do you get more jobs? You do something similar to what you all saw when you did these numbers. We increased the number of district government employees. That's what they tried to do, to fire all these people that we hired. But we had to hire these people. Otherwise, we'd just be caretakers with all these people out of work. So if you look at the employment, the District of Columbia goes from about 23,000 to 38,000. One time we had 51,000 employees here in the District of Columbia. When people have jobs, they can buy houses. When they have jobs, they can send their kids to college. When people have jobs, they don't commit crimes and go out doing all this crazy stuff. So you've got to create some jobs for them. And the place where these jobs were created, all this growth that I'm talking about was in the local governments. The federal government still has no nothing deal as much as the local governments have. And this is something, and the private sector is probably just about as bad as it was before the civil rights movement started. So there's a lot of work to be done out there on the income disparity and these other things that we're talking about now. But the great dynamic that happened in the 1960s that Barry was a part of was the fact that we were able to take over these local offices and use the political power in these places where you were in Mississippi. He was in the Mississippi Delta. The sheriff of every one of those counties in the Mississippi Delta now is black. Every major city in Mississippi has a black mayor today. Jackson, Mississippi, Greenwood, Greenville. When you get in office, now you can appoint the sheriff. You can appoint the local prosecutor. You can appoint, you can hire the bus drivers and the teachers and whatever it is. As Dr. King said in one of his speeches, if you give us the right to vote, you don't need an anti-lynching law. We'll stop the lynching when we get to be the mayor and sheriff, the police chief. We know how to stop the lynching. Just give us the right to vote. And then, and that's true of the district requirement now. We still don't have home rule here in the district requirement. I mean, if we had 2 senators, imagine what it would do with the power and gridlock they got up there on the hill. If we had some voting congressmen and senators up there, we probably could do something to help solve some of this mess. Which is probably one of the reasons why they don't want to give it to us. So what we do, we got it.
Well, one comment that you made, you said 19 million people, black folks registered there. And I think as a result of that, gerrymandering became even more essential for the politicians. They just gerrymander into one area, so your power is deflated now because you only have 2 senators, and hardly none of these people are going to elect that senator. You just you got more people, but they're even less power.
So I know that there are probably some questions in the audience that folks are going to want to know. I want to leave some time for folks in the audience to be able to ask. But I did want to ask each of you, and this is related, you touched on some of these issues. Just thinking about Marion Barry overall and its impact, particularly on D.C. You talked about the civil rights movement more broadly, but particularly in D.C. and Marion Barry. What do you think his overall impact was on the city, and how should historians, like Derek and me, here we are 20 years later writing about his terms, how should they assess his impact?
Well, I would say that he was a people person. He would get out and meet people, show up. He never, you didn't see him at Joe and Mo somewhere every night. You saw him in his room where people were, whatever time it was. People knew him. And as Frank was saying earlier, other mayors today, should take note. I think that's a signature of Mayor Barry, how he got out and dealt with the people. People loved that. I don't care what his ill wills were. They elected him and continue to elect him. So there must have been some magic about that. Not necessarily what he does, but just the magnetism of him touching the voters. I mean, it wasn't that he was always with the most sophisticated people, but he did try to be with the voters, whoever they are, wherever they were. I was in a restaurant having a drink with Marion one night, and it was not a top-notch place. And so everybody came up, always had a problem, or some issue, or something he should look at or do. And he would take notes. And he turned to me one night and he said, yeah, why don't we put in a program to do this, this, this? I said, yeah, that's great. Find the money, Mr. Mayor. This is exciting, but find the money. Every day it was like that. And cash was really tight. And he told me, he said, well, put in a program where they can't spend a dime, and only you're going to approve it. So I tried to do that. I did something like that. It's just about you saying, send me what you're trying to buy. And then we would determine the urgency of it. 2 days later, I get a call from Jamie Palmer. Palmer was the commissioner, whatever his title was, for Lawton. He called me and said, Al, I'm about to have a ride down here. I said, what's the matter? He said, well, this program you guys put in is so stringent, now I don't have the discretion to do anything. I said, well, what do you need? He said, if I don't get some toilet paper down here in the next week, this place is going to be torn up. I said, send me that damn voucher now and get all the paper you need, man. We couldn't afford to have a ride at Lawton, Well, this incidents like that, when you start tightening the screws a little bit, it affects people, and they got to, say, look, let's prioritize. What is my urgency? And we'll find the money. We couldn't buy everything. We couldn't pay for everything, So those things to me always touch me with Emancipation. I was in his office several times when visitors came in. Even somebody wanting to build a building changing the zoning law or something. So he always tried to find a way. Even though it cost money, he always tried to find a way. And I guess he involved the council as much as he can, but then he tried to keep the council out of everything too. That was one of our hazards, I think, in building the budget. The council was not in that budget building enough, as far as I was concerned, because you just get smashed when you go to council here trying to present this budget. What is this? What is this? What are you going to do here? And it's essential that they playing a role in the budget bill because they have constituents in their ward that they're trying to help too.
And we're the ones that got to vote to raise the taxes too.
That's true. Exactly.
Let's face it, they don't care raising the taxes. The council
Gotta go to the council for that.
So we had to face the heat out there when we raised people's taxes.
Now, he was shrewd enough to know who his friends on the council were, who his enemies were. I can tell you that.
Well, you know, I think what you have to what Marion Barry's public is. I think it depends upon who you're talking to and how you look at it. And you touched on some of this. I think if you talk, as long as you talk to poor people in this DC, as long as they live, they don't tell you Marion Barry gave me my first job or he helped me get my first house. I wish there was somebody down there now who would do something like that. I hear, I might dare say that I think if President Obama had a summer youth program in Chicago, he'd have a better image out there in his own hometown. And Hillary would have had something to run on that might have enabled us to win last year. And one of the reasons why she had trouble getting these inner cities out to vote, people blame them like they're victims. One of the reasons why she had trouble getting these inner cities out, because they hadn't done very much in those cities, including the Clinton Foundation. They helped get some jobs and stuff like that for these young people. So it depends upon how you look at it, who you're talking to. I remember I was with a political delegation. I took only 2 junkets when I was on the city council. One of them was to Israel, and I was with a bunch of politicians, and we were in a meeting waiting on Prime Minister Perez, who was on the floor at the whatever it is, the debate. Somebody introduced a resolution of no confidence because they've been a bombing. We were in Tel Aviv. There was a bombing in Jerusalem, and by some terrorists. And so he came out. He was tired and wasn't feeling too good and pissed off because he had talked to a bunch of politicians from the United States. We should have let him alone. But they asked us to go introduce ourselves. We went around the room. I told them my name was Frank Smith, and I was from Washington, D.C., city councilman here in Washington, D.C. And he was wiping his face like that. When I said, he said, Washington, D.C.? I said, yeah. He said, did Marion Barry ever get out of jail? Hey, what was that? I guess he would put me in my place. He told, and actually what he said was he felt safer there, despite this bombing, than he felt when he was in Washington, D.C. a few weeks before. So, hey, I mean, look, I was his guest, so I wasn't going to be rude to him. I didn't feel very safe when I got to Jerusalem that next day, but he said he felt safer. So that's his image. That image of him is all over the world. But Washington, D.C. is the city on the hill. The mayor of this city is the mayor of the most visible city in America, maybe in the world. So if you do something that's untoward, and I think the public has to hold politicians as leaders to a higher standard. They should hold them to a higher standard. They should hold Trump to a higher standard. So I think it's unfair for people to criticize him for what he did, because he shouldn't have done it. Not everybody did. I certainly didn't. And so he shouldn't have done it. I think he did hurt a lot of people when he fell from grace here in the District of Columbia. But make no mistake about it. Washington, D.C. developed the largest, now how do you feel about that? It's however you feel about it. But Washington, D.C. developed the largest black middle class in the world under this administration. Over those years, if you talk about Marion Barry being in office, we expanded the black middle class in the city more than any other city in the country. Now, some of that relates to the fact that Howard University is here, but if one of your goals is to try to help African Americans do better in this country and gain their rightful place, where they can do what everybody else does, work a decent job, send their kids off to school, buy a little property, and do something that everybody else does. If that was one of your goals, we did a better job of it here than any other city in the country.
It's interesting to wrap things up, and I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Musgrove in a minute. But what you're saying reminds me of something when Derek and I were teaching down at UDC. We taught the DC history class, and we showed the 9 Lives of Marion Barry, the documentary. And if you haven't seen it, it's very well done. It's very, it shows Marion Barry in all its complexity. And we had a showing. I had a packed house. It was a wonderful evening, and it was in the midst of the mayoral race when Adrian Fenty was running for re-election. And during the Q&A, it's a great Q&A, and Lawrence Giat stands up. And he says, look, you have to ask yourself, why is it that these voters who are so, who re-elected Marion Barry three times, and kept him in office even after the scandals. And said, we know about the girlfriends on the payroll. Said even after all that he still wins re-election. How is it that he can win re-election? And Adrian Fenty, he's the darling of the media, he's the rock star and so forth, and he's got no support, right? He was basically predicting what the press was denying, which was Fenty was going down, and he did. He's like, how is it that people can find it in their heart to forgive Marion Barry for his trespasses, and yet not forgive Adrian Fenty, right? And it comes down to, I think, a lot of what you all are saying, both on the personal side. He was very much a people person. He didn't feel like he was above anybody. He'd be down, in the restaurants, listening and talking, and really doing his best to try to solve these problems, even when he couldn't or he didn't. And also that which is something that Mayor Fenty was not known to do. So he was very much a people person. He had this long history of listening and paying attention, and people respected that. And they understood that, and they were willing to go with him for those reasons. And Lawrence Giat said too, like you said, and he got people their houses. He got people jobs. He brought tangible benefits for people, and people don't forget that. And I think that maybe that was something that Adrian Fenty never quite understood. And he didn't have that long history to draw upon that Marion Barry did.
But I think, well, let me just say to all those people who want peace and order, Hitler made the train run on time.
Sure.
The first time I went to Germany, I never saw anything like this before. Every 5 minutes there's a train. I asked the tour guide, I said, when these trains used to haul people to the others? She said, probably yes. Hitler made the train run on time. You can get in the office and do nothing with it. Or you can get in the office and do something really horrible. Horrible things. So man has done some horrible things to other people. We have something going on right now in Syria. You can do good too. Sure. And Marion Barry has never been accused of doing any of the smartful things that some of these other people have done. And he certainly wasn't accused of doing nothing, which is what they accused him, which they accused Fenty of doing. They said Fenty took something and made nothing out of it. That's and the public has a right to make that judgment. That's why I believe in elections, you all. I tell people there's gonna be another election. This is America. I love it. There's gonna be another election next year. Y'all know that, don't you? Yeah. We'll get them next time.
Gotta come on out.
We didn't get them last time. We'll get them next time.
We'll let Derek, Dr. Musgrove here, kind of wrap things up from the historical perspective.
Before he does,
should we just go right into
I think we should just go ahead to questions. And so Sharita Thompson's going to come around with the microphone. So please just raise your hand and she'll come over to you.
Okay, so we'll open with questions. So if you can raise your hand and speak into the mic, that'd be great.
Thank you. My name is Nelson Ryman Snyder, and I met Marion Barry in 1973 when the Home Rule Bill was going through the House. I was on the staff of the committee in the District of Columbia. And I was asked by the chairman, there was a lot of interest in the committee of having runoffs in the primary elections, general elections. And he asked me to go poll. The Republicans had already testified on this, the committee and the local Republicans, in favor of runoffs. So he asked me to go to the Democratic leaders in the city and poll them on this issue. I only found one who said he would testify in favor of runoffs in local elections, Marion Barry. If we had had runoffs, he might not have been elected the first time, if you remember. And he maintained that throughout his political career. He was always for runoffs. And I remember him remarking when Bill Mendelson was elected with 13% of the vote in the primary, elected to the council with 13% of the vote. And I saw him after that election. He said, "Riley, look at this. This is terrible. We're electing people with 13% of the vote." And so he maintained support of that. The other thing he also testified for at the time was that we have a governor, not a mayor. And no other local Republican would testify in front of that. I said, "Oh no, we should have a mayor. We're a city." Marion could see that we were more than a city. Congress was transferring state-level authority to this jurisdiction. And another thing testified early on was to be exempt from federal income taxation. for two reasons. One, we're taxed without our consent, and two, we're not allowed to tax the income of people who work in the city but don't live here. And he maintained that throughout his political career. And there were many other things. When Lorton was closed, he came out and said, we have to have a prison in the city. We can't be sending our prisoners all around the country. You know, our prisoners are in 18 different states now. This is terrible. They're separated from their families and friends, the community. And in one of his last acts, in his last term, was he tried to get a prison built in Ward 8. It was almost run out of the city. And there's many other things I could talk about, but I just wanted to mention that more of us should get together and talk about his legacy, things he supported that maybe we can continue to try and get enacted. And I'm in the process now of getting my papers together from when I worked on the Hill and trying to factor out some of these things and getting to write about it. And I also have some of this information I'd like to give to all the members. I think we should get together and talk about some of these things more. I think of the staff people I work with on the Hill and the Home Rule Bill was over. They're almost all dead. I mean, and there's Colbert King still living and a few others. But anyway, so that's what I had over the years with Marion Barry. And he really thought a lot about our charter and what should be in it and about local elections. He always maintained one man, one vote. When he testified, he made that very clear when he testified for runoffs, that nobody should be elected without 50% plus one.
Right.
And of course, we've just gone through a national election where that was quite an issue. So thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Other questions?
I'd like to make a comment about that. Barry was, as you say, very people-oriented. To help somebody in there. But Barry was very shrewd. He knew economic development was needed. And he would put whatever resources he could muster up in that concept. Not even the thought about how much more taxes we're going to get if, you know, like the Verizon Center we built or another stadium. He always thought jobs. He probably wanted that prison built in Ward 8 because of jobs it could create. Not necessarily because it could house miscreants, but because it would create jobs. And he fought for that, and he was shrewd. By the time the end of the first term of Marion Barry, Marion could tell you every damn line item of what it meant that was in the budget. And the budget was this thick. He knew the value of a dollar in economics or the benefit of the city. And a lot of the stuff we're seeing today, I can tell you, it goes all the way back to Barry. In terms of that he basically would okay a project if it was going to create jobs. Even the minority. But what he did not like was the fact that all the workers who worked on these projects were not district residents. And that's why they put in this minority law. And it prevailed. It's still out there. So he was shrewd when it comes to economics. People won't give him a lot of credit for that, but he was.
Good afternoon. My name is Sandra Jowers Barber. I'm a historian, oral and public historian. I now chair the Humanities Division at the University of the District of Columbia Community College. One of the last interviews that I did for UDC Forum that I host was with Mayor Barry. And he came in, he didn't travel with an entourage, as you know, so he came in, we did the interview. He was a supporter of the University of the District of Columbia. A fabulous interview. And two of my students had an opportunity to sit in, meet him. They were so excited. One is now a historian at the National Park Service, and his father and grandfather knew Marion. They were ministers. And he got an opportunity to meet him, and he talked about the summer jobs program and how that was an opportunity for him to get the first job. When we finished the interview and started walking out, the word got around that he was on campus. By the time we got from the second floor to the plaza, there were a group of students waiting for him, and the crowd increased. He had this charisma, and while he did not know everyone, you did not know that he did not know everyone. He made every student feel like he knew them and spoke to them, and they talked about their parents in the summer jobs program, and the houses and the jobs. And that kind of politician, I think on any given day, for me, he was head and shoulders above any politician in terms of his astuteness, the strategy, the political savvy that he had, understanding all of the good and the bad that went along with it, but the dedication to the people, to the economic issues, to growing the black middle class, which grew other individuals as well. Those kind of politicians just aren't here any longer. The other thing I'd like to say is, I don't know if there's a major oral history project, but I'm looking at one of my professors here and Dr. Jacobs in the corner there, and I think that we need to look at an oral history project that deals with those individuals who got those jobs and their children and the subsequent benefits of the home ownership and being able to integrate these positions that weren't available, and to continue this legacy, because if we don't pick this up and document this and validate this, there will come a time where you'll be a panel and there'll be no one in this audience who will understand, and we will not have documented those things that he did to grow this black middle class. But I'm very glad to see this panel. Hi, Dr. Musgrove. We shared an office at UDC, so I just took a moment of personal privilege there. But I think there should be a course in our DC history where we look at the city, the youth program, and we just study Marion as one of the last politicians that was directly connected to the people. You just don't have that kind of connection anymore.
So just to wrap up, I'd like to offer this. One thing that really struck me about the conversation, and I was particularly influenced by Al Hill's recollections, is that in the 4 years that Marion Barry was mayor, he found himself faced with a structural deficit, an unfunded pension liability, a prison system that usually states would handle, other expenses that the city simply couldn't handle at a time when it was hemorrhaging population. First the white population and then the black middle class, as Frank Smith said. Everyone who could get out was leaving. And he nonetheless created, with the council, a number of inventive ways to try and deal with these remarkable problems that face many American cities, but particularly DC, because of the structure of the home rule government. All the while trying to make sure that the people who had never really been served in any serious way by DC city government or the federal government which oversaw it were actually served, and that's of course the black poor. One of the things I notice about our current moment, when the city is doing better financially than it really ever has, is that Marion Barry's primary preoccupation, the state of the black poor, has been the thing that we've pushed to the side so that we can have the boom period that we're having. Remember, the 1997 Control Board legislation takes Lorton and responsibility for DC's prisons out of the city's hands and puts it in the federal government's hands. That's why prisoners, people that get arrested and sent to jail in DC are in 18 different states, meaning that their families can have difficulty getting to them, for instance. It also means that people who Barry would normally be focused on trying to give houses to are simply being pushed into Prince George's County and other places. And so our prosperity, our ability to have to be $2.6 billion in the black is primarily because the city has stopped focusing on some of those populations. And I think that at this moment, as we look back on Marion Barry, one of the things that we have to consider is if that prosperity, if that ability to move into this new and more prosperous moment has been at too high a price. And Barry, of course, would specifically ask us about those people that he considered his core constituents, the people who are being pushed out of the city, the people who no longer are the face of the city, and that's the black poor, and whether or not we're doing right by them. So with that, I'll hand it over to Sharika.
Please help me give our guests a round of applause. Thank you all. Thank you all for coming, and again, I hope to see some of your wonderful smiles in the room tomorrow as we conclude the third annual Benjamin Drummond Emancipation Day celebration. Thank you to our guests and to our audience. Have a wonderful rest of the day.
Can I make an announcement?
Sure.
At 4 p.m., this is DC Emancipation Day. We forgot to say anything about that. And I also wanted to just take a minute to say, Sharon Ambrose introduced me to this place. Councilwoman from Ward 6. And we talked about doing some things together a few weeks ago, actually. So I wanted to take a minute before we go and say mourn her passing. And I know the sir is going to do well because she set it up so that we will. But at 4 p.m. today, we have what we call the reading of the names that we do for DC Emancipation Day. You all know that on this day, April 16th, President Lincoln purchased the freedom of 3,100 former slaves here in the District of Columbia. We have a list of those names and we read them every year for the ancestors. So at 4 p.m. today, I'm going to make a mad dash out of here in a second to go to the museum and stand in front of the memorial. We have hundreds of people lined up to read the names. So if you want to see something good, meaningful, and moving, come join us today at 4 p.m. for the reading of the names. Thank you.
Where?
Thank you.
Yeah.